The tale was wrong. I knew it at 2,147 hours, standing in a doorway on nowy Świat Street in Warsaw, watching a man I had been following for 11 days walk into a building that did not exist in any operational brief I had been given. Not the wrong building, a building that was not supposed to exist at all. The address was a furniture showroom, according to the municipal records. The furniture showroom had been closed for 2 years. The building behind it had a separate entrance, a separate electrical connection, and a security camera that was not pointed at the street. It was pointed at the pavement, 6 meters in front of the entrance. The specific angle of a camera, designed to see faces before they reached the door, not after. I had been following the wrong man. Or the right man for the wrong reasons. Stop. Before I tell you what was inside that building, and I will tell you, because this file is the account that the official record does not contain, and the building is the center of everything this file is about, I need to give you the context. 30 seconds. Because if you are walking into this account for the first time, you need 30 seconds. If you have been here from episode 1, you already have it, and what comes next will land the way it is supposed to land. Warsaw. November 2005. The posting had begun 6 weeks earlier, in October, undercover as a regional security consultant for a European infrastructure development organization whose work provided legitimate professional access to the specific institutional networks the posting required. The cover was operational standard for the post, 2001 environment, the kind of cover that the post-September landscape had normalized across every major European capital. Because the post-September landscape had normalized a large number of things that the pre-September landscape had not, Warsaw, in 2005, was a specific kind of operational environment. Poland had joined NATO in 1999. Poland had joined the European Union in 2004. Poland was, officially, a fully integrated Western democratic institutional state. And Poland had, since 2002, been hosting something that the official record of every institution involved would, for the next 3 years, officially deny. Welcome to the Gray. What I am about to give you is the operational account of what the CIA's Black Site program looked like from the inside of a European posting in 2005. Not the congressional testimony version that came later. In 2014, in a 6,700-page Senate Intelligence Committee report that confirmed what the operational files had contained since 2003. Not the journalistic account The Washington Post broke this story. In November of 2005, Dana Priest's reporting that produced a Pulitzer Prize and a furious White House response. The operational account. The version that existed in the field, in the specific intelligence environment of Warsaw in autumn of 2005, before the congressional testimony, and before the newspaper headlines, and before the institutional response that the institutional response always produces when the gap between the official story and the operational reality finally closes. Too far to manage. The man I had been following was named Tomasz Wiśniewski in the operational brief, mid-level Polish intelligence liaison officer. Specific access to the bilateral security cooperation framework that the posting's collection requirements had identified as a priority target. I had been building the cultivation across 11 days, the standard approach, professional, overlap meetings, gradually deepening contact. The careful incremental protocol that the formation had built over 23 years of operational work, standard, clean, unremarkable. Until he walked into the building on nowy Świat that was not a furniture showroom. I stood in the doorway for 47 seconds. The formation's protocol for an unexpected contact environment deviation. Stop, assess, do not follow, do not withdraw, observe. The building's second-floor window showed a light that went on at 2,148 hours and off at 2,151 hours, 3 minutes. Whatever Wiśniewski had gone in for, it took 3 minutes. He came out at 2,152. turned right, walked toward the Centrum metro station without looking back. Standard walking pattern. 100. No counter-surveillance behavior. He did not believe he had been followed. He was correct. I had maintained a standard surveillance detection gap throughout the 11 days, and the 0.82 probability assessment assigned to my detection status was below the threshold that would have required changing the surveillance methodology. I did not follow him. I stayed in the doorway and looked at the building for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Then I walked to the nearest operational dead drop, a specific location in the Praga district across the Vistula, behind the third support pillar of a pedestrian underpass near the Stadion Narodowy construction site, and left a note that contained 3 words and a location reference. The 3 words were, "Find the building." The building on Nowy Świat was, I had assessed in the 47 seconds of observation, one of 2 things. The first possibility, a Polish intelligence service facility operating outside the bilateral cooperation framework that the posting's cover assignment had been using as its operational access point. A facility that Wisniewski was accessing in his personal capacity, not his professional capacity. In this configuration, the facility was a domestic intelligence matter that the posting's collection requirements did not include. The second possibility was the one that the 47 seconds of observation had assigned a probability weight of 0.67 to an American facility, specifically the kind of American facility that the post-September operational landscape had placed in specific European countries under specific bilateral arrangements that were not in any official document, because the arrangement's core feature was that they would never appear in any official document at 0.67, the formation's action threshold. And the action was, find the building. The response came back through the dead drop at 0623 hours the following morning. 2 pages. 4. The building. And the building's utility connections showed a power consumption pattern consistent with a facility operating continuous high-draw equipment, the specific power profile of a facility maintaining temperature-controlled, secure rooms. The building's ownership had been transferred in March of 2002 to a holding company registered in Delaware that the corporate registry showed as active, but whose officers were listed as a law firm whose entire client list, when the law firm's public filings were traced, consisted of a single category of client, organizations whose actual principals were not disclosed. The building's external communications infrastructure showed 3 separate hardened cable connections that were not present in the pre-2002 municipal infrastructure records. The specific combination of power profile, ownership structure, and communications infrastructure matched at a 0.91 correlation level. The infrastructure profile that a classified technical assessment circulated in the post-September European operational environment had described as the signature of a Category 3 facility. Category 3. I want to give you that term in its operational specificity rather than its bureaucratic abstraction. A Category 3 facility, in the post-September operational vocabulary that the intelligence community had developed between 2001 and 2003, was a facility for the detention and interrogation of high-value targets outside the legal frameworks that would apply to detention and interrogation conducted in the United States or in any officially acknowledged facility. The term was bureaucratic. The operational reality was specific. A Category 3 facility was a place where people were held and questioned in ways that the institution conducting the holding and questioning could not acknowledge publicly, because acknowledging them publicly would require acknowledging that the institution had decided to conduct activities that the institution's own legal framework and the legal frameworks of the countries hosting the facilities did not permit. The building on Nowy Świat was, at 0.91 probability, one of those facilities. I sat with that for longer than 11 seconds. The formation's threshold for controlled response is 11 seconds, the window between receiving catastrophic information and acting on it. What the building on Nowy Świat represented was not the kind of catastrophic information that required acting in 11 seconds. It was the kind that required acting correctly, which is a different requirement. 11 seconds gives you a controlled response. Acting correctly on a 0.91 probability assessment that implicates your own institution in activities that your own institution cannot officially acknowledge requires the specific kind of assessment that the formation builds. Across a career, rather than across 11 seconds. The Warsaw posting was week 6 of that assessment. The physical archive had been building toward this category of finding since Budapest in 1993. The carrying structure had been built for exactly this weight. I acted correctly, which meant in November of 2005 inches Warsaw, I did not act at all. Not yet. I built the file. Here is what the file produced across the next 3 weeks. And I am going to give you the specific operational texture of those 3 weeks, because the texture is the thing that the official account, when the official account eventually arrived 9 years later, in 2014, did not and could not contain. The building on Nowy Świat was accessed by Wisniewski 7 more times across the 3 weeks. Each access was between 2,100 and 2,300 hours. Each access lasted between 3 and 8 minutes. The pattern was consistent with a liaison function, a mid-level officer maintaining a regular reporting relationship with a facility that he did not run, but that he provided a specific service to. The service, based on the timing and duration pattern and the specific institutional position that the operational brief described for Wisniewski, was most consistent with a coordination function, ensuring that the facility's activities remained invisible within the Polish institutional framework that was theoretically responsible for the geographic area the facility occupied. The facility had 3 additional access patterns that the observation produced across the 3 weeks. A vehicle pattern. A specific class of rental vehicle with diplomatic adjacent registration accessed the building's rear entrance on a cycle that the probability assessment are identified as a transfer cycle, the specific operational rhythm of a class facility that was receiving and releasing individuals on a schedule rather than maintaining a static population. A communications pattern. The hardened cable connections showed traffic spikes at specific hours that matched a pattern consistent with secure reporting to a distant institutional authority. And a personnel pattern. 4 individuals whose movement profiles the surveillance had been able to partially map access the building through the rear entrance in a manner that was consistent with operational staff rather than detainees. The specific quality of movement of people who were going to work, not people who were being held. The physical archive received these findings 1 data point at a time. In the dead drop behind the 3rd pillar of the Stadion Narodowy pedestrian underpass, across 3 weeks of Warsaw November cold, the temperature dropped from 8 degrees Celsius in October to -3 by mid-November. The Vistula moved through the city at approximately 0.9 meters per second slower than the Bosphorus, faster than the Nile, the specific mid-range pace of a Central European river in its autumn volume. I registered the Vistula on the first morning of the posting, at 0700 hours, standing on the Poniatowski Bridge, cold, gray-blue, carrying the specific quality of a river that has crossed the Polish plains before reaching the capital. Not ancient sediment like the Nile, recent sediment. The agricultural topsoil of the Central European plain, the specific brown-gray of a river that is still in productive relationship with the land it crosses, filed. The formation had mapped every water body in every posting since Vienna. The Vistula was the 17th water body in 23 years of operational geography. The 17 data points that the building file had produced by November 21, 2005. The date the Washington Post story published were in the physical archive, not in the Warsaw Station's official files. Not in any institutional report that I had filed with the station chief, whose operational brief for the posting did not include any collection requirement related to American facilities in the Polish geography. The 17 data points were in the archive, cross-referenced to the post-September Category 3 Facility Technical Assessment, cross-referenced to the Ownership Structure Investigation, cross-referenced to the Wisniewski Access Pattern. The archive was building the specific kind of record that the Senate Intelligence Committee would eventually spend years building from the institutional side, but the archive's record had been building since November 4, 2005, when I had stood in a doorway on Nowy Świat for 47 seconds, and the probability assessment had reached 0.91. The Washington Post, story published on the 2nd of November, 2005. Dana Priest. The headline: CIA holds terror suspects in secret prisons. The story named Romania and Thailand. It did not name Poland. The omission was not an error. The Post had agreed, at the government's request, to withhold the names of specific countries whose hosting of the facilities had been provided under arrangements that the government argued would be compromised by publication. The story named The Program. It described the facilities in general terms. It confirmed that the CIA was operating detention facilities in foreign countries outside the normal legal frameworks that govern detention and interrogation. The institutional response was what the institutional response always is. The program is classified. Confirming or denying the specific details would compromise national security. The program is legal. The program has congressional oversight. The program protects American lives. I read the story in the Warsaw Station's open-source monitoring feed at 0830 hours on the 2nd of November, 2005. The building on Nowy Świat was 4 kilometers from where I was sitting. The 17 data points were in the physical archive behind the third pillar of the Stadion Narodowy underpass. The 0.91 probability assessment was 2 weeks old. The Washington Post story moved the probability assessment from 0.91 to 0.97. Not because the story confirmed the specific building, it did not. Because the story confirmed the program's existence, and a program's existence confirmed by a source with the Post's access level, moved the probability that any specific facility matching the program's operational profile was part of the program from 0.91 to 0.97, the compound confirmation. 2 independent observations, the operational assessment and the journalistic investigation, pointing at the same conclusion from different angles, 0.97. Enough to act on. But the action the 0.97 finding required was not the action that the operational situation made available. The action the finding required was institutional reporting, the specific mechanism through which an operational finding of this significance was supposed to enter the institutional record, trigger an internal review, produce a formal assessment, and generate the kind of institutional accountability that findings of this significance were supposed to generate. The action the operational situation made available was the informal documentation network, the physical archive, the dead drop behind the third pillar. Because the institutional reporting mechanism, the standard secure channel, the station chief's operational brief, the formal assessment process was exactly the mechanism that the program being reported had been specifically designed to operate outside of. The program existed outside the institutional frameworks that would normally receive a report of its existence. Reporting it through those frameworks was reporting it to the institution that had designed it to be invisible to those frameworks. The report would be received, it would be classified, it would be filed. And it would produce the same 4-sentence response that the 1993 Budapest emergency report on the Ames penetration had produced. Receipt acknowledged. Reliability uncertain. No action recommended. I had seen that response before. I knew what it cost. The physical archive received the November 2005 Warsaw findings under a new classification heading, Post-September Operational Infrastructure. European Geography, Category 3. The heading was new. The mechanism was the same one that had been building since Budapest in 1993, one data point at a time. Patient. Growing toward the threshold. Here is the thing that the 2014 Senate Intelligence Committee report confirmed, and that the Warsaw posting had documented in the archive 9 years earlier. The program was not a secret from the institution. It was a secret of the institution, a specific kind of institutional knowledge that was held officially by some parts of the institution and officially unknown to other parts of the institution, and the division between the parts that knew and the parts that did not know was not random. The division was structural. It followed the specific institutional boundaries that separated operational authority from oversight authority. The people who ran the program knew about the program. The people who were supposed to provide oversight of the program were managed in ways that produced the specific institutional condition in which oversight existed in official form but not in operational fact. This is the specific institutional dynamic that the Ames case had documented in one form and that the Warsaw posting was documenting in a different form, not a penetration by an adversary, a penetration by the institution of its own oversight mechanisms. The institution operating in the gap between its official accountability structure and its operational reality, using the specific institutional tools, classification, compartmentalization, need-to-know frameworks that had been built to protect legitimate intelligence operations, to protect operations whose legitimacy was, at minimum, contested. The gray area, where the institution's official story and the operational reality diverge, where this account lives now. The operational consequence that the Warsaw posting produced, because the posting did not end with 17 data points in an archive behind a pillar in a pedestrian underpass. It ended with something that the physical archive contains, and that this file is transmitting for the first time. Something that happened on the 3rd of December, 2005, at 1,814 hours, in a cafe on Krakowski Przedmieście Street, 4 blocks from the building on Nowy Świat. I was meeting with a different contact from Wiśniewski, a separate thread of the posting's collection requirements, unrelated to the building investigation. The meeting was standard. The cafe was the specific kind of central Warsaw cafe that the operational environment used for professional meetings, visible, commercial, unremarkable. The kind of location that provides the operational cover of normalcy without requiring the specific institutional access of official meeting venues. Coffee, 89 degrees, slightly under-extracted. I noted this and set the cup aside. The contact was 12 minutes into a professional conversation about regional infrastructure development when they stopped mid-sentence. Their eyes had moved to a point behind my left shoulder. The specific quality of attention that a person gives a point behind someone else's shoulder when what they are seeing is producing a threat assessment that they are trying not to make visible. I did not turn immediately. The formation's protocol for detecting a threat indicator from a contact's eye movement. Wait 2.3 seconds, then execute a natural turn that the environment provides cover for. I waited. A waiter passed behind me. I turned with the waiter's movement. Marcus Webb was sitting 3 tables away, facing me, not pretending to face away, facing me. Looking at me directly for approximately 0.8 seconds before his gaze moved to the window, 0.8 seconds of direct eye contact across a Warsaw cafe. The Cairo cafe had been 0.6 seconds of parallel threat registration. Warsaw was 0.8 seconds of direct acknowledgement. The difference in duration was the difference between an operational instrument that believed it was unobserved and an operational instrument that knew it was observed and was communicating that knowledge directly. Webb knew I was in Warsaw. Webb knew I knew he was in Warsaw. The 0.8 seconds was a communication, not accidental, not a professional trying to maintain cover. A professional communicating. I see you, I know you see me, and I am here anyway. The probability assessment ran at operational speed, 0.94. Webb is the trajectory assessment's subject. 0.91. His presence in this specific cafe at this specific hour is not coincidental. 0.87. The communication embedded in the 0.8 seconds of direct eye contact is intentional. 0.83. The intention is to produce a specific response in the observer that the entity can use operationally. What response? Not fear. The formation does not produce fear in the 11 seconds to action sense. The response Webb was engineering was the response of an observer who realizes they have been observed, the instinct to change behavior, to close the documentation, to withdraw from the investigation that the observer's presence threatens. The entity's methodology: manage visibility. The Warsaw version of manage visibility was not institutional pressure on a professional contact network, as it had been in Cairo. It was personal presence, direct acknowledgement. A message delivered in 0.8 seconds of eye contact. I know where you are. I know what you are doing, and I am not stopping you, because I do not need to stop you. Because what you are doing does not threaten me. This is the operational insight that the December 3 Warsaw Cafe produced, and it is the most important thing the Warsaw posting contains. The entity was not afraid of the documentation. The entity had, in the months between the Cairo posting in February 2004 and the Warsaw posting in December 2005, reached the conclusion that the documentation was not sufficient to threaten the entity's operational position. The documentation existed. The entity knew it existed, and the entity had assessed correctly, based on the evidentiary threshold, that the documentation had not yet reached, that the documentation in its current form could not produce the institutional acknowledgement that would be required to make it operationally consequential. The 0.8 seconds of eye contact was the entity's assessment of the documentation's current status: insufficient. The entity could afford to acknowledge the documentation's existence because the entity had assessed the documentation as not yet a threat. The entity was right. In December of 2005, the documentation was not yet sufficient. The threshold had not been reached. The archive was growing, but had not grown enough. The significance was approaching but had not arrived. What the 0.8 seconds of eye contact added to the archive was specific and operationally important. It added the entity's own assessment, the entity's own probability weight on the documentation's current status to the record. An entity that acknowledges an observer's presence is an entity that has assessed the observer as below the threat threshold. The entity's acknowledgement was itself a data point, and the data point, cross-referenced against the evidentiary weight of the documentation at its December 2005 status, produced a specific operational finding. The documentation needed to be stronger before the entity's assessment would change. How much stronger? The formation's methodology for reverse engineering a threat threshold from a hostile actor's behavioral acknowledgement produced an estimate. The Physical Archive's December 3 entry contains that estimate. The estimate is in the archive. The archive is growing toward it. I finished my coffee, 89 degrees. Wrong. I left it. I returned my attention to the contact across the table, who had processed the web sighting with the specific professional control of someone who had been in operational environments long enough to continue a conversation through an unexpected threat indicator. We completed the meeting. I left the cafe at 1,849 hours. Webb was gone. No counter-surveillance tail that the standard detection route, run from the cafe to the Nowy Świat metro station and back to the Praga dead drop, could identify. He had come and gone. The message had been delivered in 0.8 seconds. The visit was complete. The Warsaw posting's last significant operational event occurred on the 17th of December, 2005, 14 days after the cafe sighting, not in Warsaw. Through a channel that connected Warsaw to the wider documentation network, a communication from Karim's parallel archive, the Lebanese-Egyptian observer whose 3-year protection operation had been disclosed in Cairo in February of 2004, whose network had been aligned with the physical archive in the 72-hour operational window. The communication contained 4 words, not 4 words like the Beirut Corniche communication of March 2003, 4 different words. 4 words that the archive's cross-referencing system identified as a specific operational alert. The document from October 1993, the handwritten, single-page listing, 11 institutional decisions, 3 of them made by the officer who was now the subject of the trajectory assessment at 0.94, the document that had been in the physical archive for 12 years had been accessed not by the archive's custodians, by someone else. The physical archive's security protocols included specific indicators for unauthorized access. The same dead-drop methodology that protected the archive's contents also produced specific, detectable signatures when a location had been examined by someone other than the designated custodian. The October 1993 document's location, one of the archive's Washington nodes, had been examined. The examination had not produced the document's removal. The document was still in place, but it had been found, not retrieved, found and left. Another communication in the entity's specific operational vocabulary. I know where the archive is. I know where the archive is. The probability assessment, updated with the December 17 communication. The entity's capability assessment, 0.91. The entity has identified at least one of the archive's physical locations. 0.84. The entity has the operational capability to access additional locations if it chooses. 0.78. The entity has chosen not to retrieve or destroy the documents it has found. The 0.78 probability for the choice not to act was the operationally critical finding, not the access. The choice not to act on the access. An entity with the capability to close the documentation that has chosen not to close it has made a specific operational calculation. The documentation, in its current form, is more valuable to the entity intact than destroyed, because a destroyed document is a document whose existence can be asserted. An intact document in an archive that the entity can monitor is a document whose contents the entity knows and whose distribution the entity can track. The entity was using the archive. Not against the archive's purpose, the documentation process was still growing, still building toward the threshold. The entity was using the archive as an intelligence source. The entity knew what the archive contained. The entity knew what the archive did not yet contain, and the entity was using that knowledge to stay ahead of the threshold, to ensure that the institutional response to the documentation, when the documentation eventually triggered one, would be a response the entity had already prepared for. The Warsaw posting's final data point entered the physical archive on the 21st of December, 2005. The Vistula was running at 0.7 meters per second, slower than the autumn flow, the winter volume reducing the river's pace, -6 degrees Celsius. The breath vapor lasted 2.8 seconds. The longest vapor duration of any posting in the operational career, longer than London's 1991 Thames morning, longer than Berlin's 1985. Spree crossing, Warsaw winter cold, filed. The formation had been mapping breath vapor duration since the Bosphorus. In 2001, Warsaw produced the specific extreme of the calibration reference, 2.8 seconds. Below -5, breath vapor becomes its own small weather system, moving with the wind, rather than simply dispersing. The cold that makes you feel the air as a physical substance, rather than an ambient condition. The posting concluded on the 22nd of December 2005. The Warsaw accommodation returned to anonymity. The Vistula continued at 0.7 meters per second through the winter city. The building on Nowy Świat continued its operations that the Polish government would officially deny through 2014. When the Senate Intelligence Committee report and a European Court of Human Rights ruling would produce the specific institutional moment at which the gap between the official story and the operational reality closed too far. To manage. The building story, like the Ames case's story, had a resolution, delayed, costly, but eventual. The documentation the Warsaw posting had added to the physical archive was one small part of the record that built toward that resolution. The entity's 0.8 seconds of eye contact in the Krakowski Przedmieście Cafe remained in the archive as the Warsaw posting's most operationally significant data point. Not the building on Nowy Świat, not the 17 surveillance data points, not the Washington Post story's confirmation. The 0.8 seconds, the entity's own assessment, communicated directly that the documentation was not yet sufficient. The threshold identified from the hostile side, the target given specific coordinates by the adversary's own acknowledgement. The archive was growing toward those coordinates. One word at a time. One data point at a time. One posting at a time. The threshold was no longer a direction. It was a specific location that the entity had, in 0.8 seconds of direct eye contact in a Warsaw cafe in December of 2005, inadvertently mapped. The bank holds, the water moves. The archive grows. The gray operative, every week, without exception. Start from episode 1. The order is not a suggestion. It never was. The architecture holds. The significance is approaching. Stay in the shadows.